Okay. Hello, everybody. Today we want to present this very little challenge for us of queer temporal disobedience, a manifesto from South Africa's The Quiet Violence of Dreams, Junx, and the Queer Book of Revelation. These are three very good novels that we want to present and challenge today. So I want to start this presentation with a provocation from Mangani that say, is there a black mode of being in the world? Stated differently, is being black in the world different in fundamental respect to being white in the world? Queer temporalities name the disruption of normative time, the linear life course structured around school, wage labor, reproductive family, and retirement. Elizabeth Freeman calls this chrononormativity, the disciplining of bodies into productivity and heteronormativity reproduction. But queer temporality is not only about refusing linear life stages, it's also about how time itself has been colonized. Anfeld and Mafosa with Makama describe the coloniality of time, the way Western time was imposed as the universal measure, erasing or devaluating the non-European rhythm and experiences. Walter Mignolo reminds us that time is a fundamental concept of coloniality, inseparable from project of domination. Madeo and Anchard at the time is also racialized. Black and queer youth often live what Anchard calls racial time, where unequal access to institutions and futures make their use of time criminalized as time theft. We see that this mapped onto practical of surveillance in South Africa, where to be out of time, it's also to be subject to intensified control, as we will see with the novel. Queer theory has expanded this critique. Amin defined temporality as the social patterning of time itself, not a natural background. Morrigan described trauma time, where past, present, and future collapse into one another through flashbacks, amnesia, and disorientation. Martin, in 2022, explores low time and peak time in queer sectional practices such as feasting, where extended duration itself become aerobic. This critical contribution reminds us that queer temporalities are not just disruption of chronology, but also and mostly lived modes of survival, intimacy, and also embodiment. Within this frame, collapse for us must be redefined. It's not only failure, but a generative condition. Collapse opens spaces for alternative temporalities, new forms of organization, and other ways of sensing the world. Achille Mbembe described post-colonial time as interlocking of present, past, and futures, multidirectional and multidimensional, rather than linear. Time is not a single thread, but a layering of duration, memories, and anticipation that fold into one another. In this sense, collapse named the moment when the fiction of linear continuity gives way to the reality of overlapping and discontinuous rhythms. At the same time, collapse manifests through transgressive practices that refuse the synchronization demanded by capitalist and colonial orders. As Brand in 2021 wrote, misdirection is the way. Within this asynchronous relationship, time is not measured as in seconds, minutes, and hours, but in degrees of resistance and self-determination. In this sense, youths locate themselves outside white time and time itself. Black youth violated that which consistently violates them, while creating new temporal modes of being. Everyday practice such as marking the lock, staying off time, or being scheduled enact a breakdown of the normative timeline. This practice of disobedience shows that collapse is not only catastrophic, but also insurgent, a lived method of undoing the dominant chronologies from within. Critically, in post-apartheid South Africa, collapse also unmasked the myth of rainbow reconciliation. Instead of harmony, we find dissonant temporality that expose the ongoing structures of inequalities. If collapse is the method, then refusal is the architecture. Refusal doesn't mean passivity or simple negation. It's an active practice of refusing the very terms under which life is organized. Frantz Fanon reminds us that colonialism positioned Blacks' experience in what he called the zone of non-being, cast as primitive outside of history without a valid temporality of its own. The refuse then is to reject this temporal ordering, to refuse being placed out of time and affirm other chronologies of experience. Dladla's notion of Black horology insists that Black people's shorter lifespans are not natural, but are the product of structural racism. Here, refusal means rejecting temporal scarcity as destiny and insisting on a way of living that exceed it. Refusal also takes aesthetic and political form. It can manifest as drift, loop, or fugue, strategies that suspend capitalist productivity and narrative linearity. Mateo described Black queer youth queering the clock, mocking with white time, bending schedules, and inhibiting anachronistic space as acts of everyday resistance. Lynn Simpson, writing in Indigenous context, expanded refusal being beyond no into a practice of word making. Refusal as the refusal to accept the colonization of body, lands, and also temporalities, and the creation of other uncreated modes of existence. In this sense, refusal produces other words rather than merely opposing them. It is both survival tactic and generative prophecy. It unsettles the promise of reconciliation or rainbow nationalism and instead insists on alternative architecture of being on time. Finally, substance addiction can be understood as both a lived experience and intellectual concept. Of course, this presentation is not going to suggest the use of drug substances, but it's just a literary way of understanding the use of drug. In this sense, drug use and Ubuntu bring the framework back to the embodiment and the African philosophy. Florencio in 2022 showed how chemsex function as a queer subculture and reproduction, not only pathology, but a pedagogy of survival, where the body itself become a temporal technology. Through drugs and sex, new temporalities emerge, slowed, looped, and fractured, that make queer life more livable. Raw and Other in 2023 similarly described the addiction as a generating complex, recursive, and meaning. As generative, complex, recursive, and fragmented temporalities. Time that resists coherence but nonetheless produce meaning. In South African context, Sibanda and Batisai demonstrate how youth use substances to negotiate belonging under post-apartheid exclusion. Drug thus become a resource for identity, agency, and community making in conditions of poverty and unemployment. Ubuntu temporality, as described by Mafosa and Makama, offer a counterpoint. Ubuntu disrupts the notion of individualism and foregrounds collective coexistence. As philosopher Michael Eze formulates Ubuntu as thus, a person is a person to other people. And if we belong to each other, we participate in our creation. We are because you are. And since you are, definitely I am. The I am is not a rigid subject, but a dynamic self-construction. Ramos further suggests that being within Ubuntu means also inhabiting a perpetual state of motion. To be human is to be becoming, always in motion, always collective. This notion of being existent troubles the notion of colonial time. If being a person is to be a perpetual state of becoming, it follows that there is no point in one's life where they become the envisioned perfect self. Importantly, the colonial promise inherent in valorizing the white man as the ultimate figure of humanness become an attainable fallacy. This in turn disrupts the foundation of colonial time. Temporality through Ubuntu allow Black people the space to empathize with their past suffering that survives into the present. As it's seen the person as being becoming, it makes clear that being humans must not be refined. It reminds one that there are many ways of existing in the world beyond being white. Ubuntu emphasizes coexistence, memory, and healing. It disrupts the colonial promise of linear progress and instead allows time to pause, to sit with suffering, and to imagine more human possibilities. Together, drug use and Ubuntu illuminate queer temporalities not as an abstract theory, but as lived practice. They show how body and communities create survival strategies by bending and breaking dominant chronology. To sum up this theoretical framework, queer temporality exposes how time itself is racialized, colonized, and disciplined. Collapse, reclaim, fail as generative. Refusal through negation into architecture, and drug use and Ubuntu show how subcultural and African philosophies generate temporalities of survival, healing, and future otherwise. Now I will just interrupt here to give the possibility to Sia to go ahead. Uh, yeah. Sia, can you share the second
Beg your
part?
pardon?
Can you share the second part?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you need to press the share screen on your side.
Mm-mm-mm.
Is it not allowing?
Okay, I will just share. Just
Okay.
okay. Just tell me when moving on.
Um, c-
Okay.
can we jump to slide 9?
Yep.
So I'm picking up. Thank you so much, Vincenzo. So I'm picking up from here, and I hope my colleague doesn't want to kill me for what I'm about to do. But instead of doing the talk we planned, I'm going to fold what Vincenzo just said in with everything else we've been hearing the last few minutes, the last few talks. These 3 books are mostly set in South Africa. And one of the terms we heard was rainbowism, and I think it just needs a bit of explanation. So South Africa has a long colonial history. It had apartheid. I think everybody knows this. And then in 1994, a solution was kind of imposed called, which we call the Rainbow Nation. And what these books do in different ways is they think of the Rainbow Nation as conversion therapy for wounded South Africans. Like you're all going to now be forced into peace because on a capitalist timeline, we're going to have political stability so that business can continue and all of those things. And what happens in this book is there's kind of a troubling the teleology. So I'm borrowing some of the other speakers' terms, but there's a troubling the teleology where the writers and the protagonists are saying, no, actually, it cannot happen on the timeline. So if you look at the quiet violence of dreams, for an example, there is a young queer black man. His name is Tsepo. You find him living in Cape Town. He goes to a psychiatric institution. He does sex work, and the story isn't that he's not trying to resolve a thing. He's observing the world. He's taking it in. He has these intense moments of being. It's very Virginia Woolf. It's very time gets suspended, and we heard about shimmers and we heard about melancholy. There's a lot of that involved in the quiet violence of dreams. Even the title itself takes you into that space. There are a few other South African books I'd wish I had recommended. Another one is called Dreaming in Color, where it does exactly the same thing. Time slows down, time speeds up. The font and the formatting change. So the genre itself is kind of undergoing, I feel, a conversion away from Victorian times, New Romans, ways of writing and reading books into, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of deconstruction happening, and I think Vincenzo is speaking a lot to that. If you read Junx, for an example, Junx takes place in a single day. The character is going to a party. It sounds like a very simple story, but what is happening in his mind is a stream of consciousness where he talks about dictators, about the age of consent in different countries, drug use. And we never know who he is. So this idea of characters having a name, an identity. Vincenzo, I think, spoke about the idea of an identity not being a fixed, static thing, but dynamic. The protagonist in Junks, we never find out what the name of the protagonist is. Or if you go back, I'm not asking you to go back, Vincenzo. I'm just saying, if you go back to the quiet